Let's say your metabolism has slowed to a crawl, and despite training hard and eating right, your body composition won't budge. Maybe you suspect your thyroid, but every doctor you see runs basic labs, tells you everything's normal, and sends you away with advice to just eat less and exercise more. Meanwhile, you're exhausted, your recovery is shot, and you can't figure out why lifting weights and tracking isn't working anymore. My guest today reveals why standard thyroid testing misses the real problems blocking your fat loss and muscle gain, which markers matter for people who lift weights, and how autoimmune thyroid conditions like Hashimoto's develop so that you can protect and optimize your thyroid to support your metabolism and fat loss goals. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today we're going to explore why thyroid dysfunction could be a hidden barrier preventing you from building muscle and losing fat, despite doing all the right things. My guest today is Dr. Eric Osansky, a functional medicine practitioner who specializes in thyroid health, particularly hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, and autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's. After being diagnosed himself with Graves' disease in 2008, Dr. Osansky achieved remission through natural protocols and has since focused his practice on helping people address root causes. We love root causes. Those are important. The root causes of thyroid dysfunction rather than just managing symptoms with things like medication or even irreversible treatments. He's the author of several books on thyroid health and hosts the Save My Thyroid podcast. Go follow that podcast if you're into that, or if you have thyroid condition and want to learn, please follow Save My Thyroid. Because your thyroid, very important. It controls a lot of things. Your metabolic rate, your energy production, your recovery, how your body responds to things like strength training. And for those of us focused on building muscle, losing fat, optimizing performance, thyroid health often gets overlooked until it becomes a serious problem and then it stalls your progress. So today, you're going to learn how thyroid dysfunction shows up differently in people who, for example, train like we do, which lab markers might matter beyond the basic TSH testing, how training stress and lifestyle factors can trigger autoimmune thyroid problems, and some practical tips, as always, that you can do to protect and optimize your thyroid while still pursuing all of these fun goals we have for body composition and health. Eric, glad to have you on Wits and Weights. Good to see you again, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Philip. Really excited to have this conversation. Yeah, definitely check out my podcast because you're also on the podcast. So people need to listen to me interviewing you.
There you go. I let you make the plug because if it comes up, it comes up. So definitely check that out. All right. So I've been having a lot, every time I have an expert on like you these days as in the last few months, I really have started off with trying to define some basic things because I think we gloss over that sometimes in these conversations, not you, but the listeners like, hey, I haven't heard a thyroid expert in a while. What's going on with a thyroid? Exactly what is it? What is that gland? They might not even know it's a gland. What does it do? Oh, it produces hormones. What hormones? Just so we have a basic understanding of biology as really important foundation before we dive into dysfunction and optimization. So lay it on us, 30,000 foot level, describe the thyroid gland and everything about it.
Yeah, so thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland in the front of the neck, and it, as you mentioned, it's responsible for the production of different thyroid hormones. The most well-known T4 and T3. There are others. There are T1, T2. We still can't test for those in the blood, even though there are like T2 supplements that some recommends for like weight loss. But yeah, so the thyroid gland produces mostly T4 or thyroxine, approximately 90%, and then approximately 10% T3. So most of the T3 is actually produced by the conversion of T4 into T3. And T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone that actually binds to the receptors. And then you actually have a pituitary hormone called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. So again, that's secreted by the pituitary gland. And that communicates, that stimulates the thyroid gland when to produce thyroid hormone. Or in the case of hyperthyroidism, the opposite, the pituitary gland will slow down the production of TSH because you have too much thyroid hormone. So yeah, and then we could talk, I guess, a little bit later about antibodies and autoimmunity. But as far as the actual thyroid, yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, the thyroid hormone there are thyroid hormone receptors pretty much everywhere, just about every cell and tissue in the body. So if you have too much or too little, that's not a good thing. And yeah, it could, obviously the focus here is going to be more on weight loss, muscle mass. But yeah, like cholesterol, just to give an example, like if you have high cholesterol on a blood test, not to say it's always related to the thyroid, but if you have low thyroid, that also plays a role in cholesterol metabolism. And unfortunately, a lot of medical doctors will just resort to statins to lower
Hmm.
the cholesterol, but it's possible it could be thyroid. It could be a low thyroid. So, and it could affect bone density. Of course, affects the heart. I mean, again, you name it, thyroid hormone definitely could play a role in controlling.
Yeah, and it's just coincidentally in kind of the center of the body too, which gives you this visual of how connected it is to everything. Just to nerd out for a second, like in the evolution of our species, like why would the thyroid evolve? Like, why do we really have it? It's a fundamental question. What's important about the thyroid? Because we talk so much about it being too high or too low and affecting these things, but like, why do we even have it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Nobody actually have asked me that specific question as far as why we have the thyroid,
That's
but
called going off script right there.
but anyway, it's a good question. But I mean, the pituitary gland actually is the master gland. So I will say this: like some people call the thyroid gland the master gland, but the pituitary gland controls the thyroid, controls the adrenals, controls the like communicates with the sex hormones. But again, like the thyroid gland, all the pretty much every cell tissue in the body needs the thyroid hormone, and again, it gets even deeper, like down to a cellular level. But I mean, metabolism is huge. Of course, there are times when we need to slow down our metabolism. There are times, in a nutshell, when we need to increase to speed up our metabolism. So I guess trying to make it as basic as possible, as far as the why we have, like, evolutionary wise, why we have a thyroid gland. It's
So like homeostasis, it sounds like it's a homeostatic regulator, right? Kind
Pretty
of like,
much, yeah, exactly. So, like, balance, yeah.
yeah, keeps you in the zone. Okay, no, that's good. All right, now you personally had, I alluded to in the intro, had Graves' disease yourself. Definitely would love you to explain what that is, because there are definitely a lot of autoimmune conditions across the spectrum, even beyond thyroid, that there's misinformation about, I suppose. But what is that? What happened with you and your metabolism and your physical health, fitness, all of that, and how did that connect to systematic things that you then started exploring and going down the rabbit hole with thyroid health?
Yeah, so Graves' disease is, like Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is the most common, more of the common thyroid condition, and it's autoimmune. So Graves also autoimmune and involves hyperthyroidism. And I mean, I don't. So do you want me to talk about my story, like how I was diagnosed with Graves, or just kind of what it is, like what
Yeah, a
Graves
little bit of what it
is?
is, but I absolutely want to understand how it affected you. Like,
Yeah, I mean, because actually, prior to being diagnosed, I was trying to lose weight. I was, 182 pounds, usually like to be like between 165, 170. And so I was dieting, I was detoxifying, I was overtraining. I should have known better, but I wasn't really paying attention and listened to my body. And so I was losing weight. And then, eventually losing a lot of weight. Little did I know was some of it at least related to the hyperthyroidism. And then eventually I was walking around in a retail store. They had one of those automated blood pressure machines. I took my blood pressure, which was normal, but my resting heart rate was a little bit high. It was 90 beats per minute. And I was just thinking, well, maybe it's because I'm just walking around. But then I measured my heart rate the next few days, and it was anywhere between 90 and 110 beats per minute. And I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. And then uh, went to a primary care doctor, got diagnosed with hyperthyroidism initially, eventually went to an endocrinologist, got diagnosed with Graves. And so yeah, like the hyperthyroidism in my case, it increased my resting heart rate, caused palpitations, lost 42 pounds. So I dropped down to 140, which again, a lot less than I wanted to be. Had an increased appetite, and increased bowel movements. I mean, I didn't have anxiety, but a lot of people have anxiety with the elevation in thyroid hormones. Yeah, hair loss is common. So yeah, but I mean, again, the weight loss was big, and a lot of I mean, it's funny and not funny because most of the people I work with are women, and that's sometimes is the one benefit, that they're like, well, at least I lost weight. And then some people don't lose weight with Graves, for
Interesting.
different reasons. And when they don't lose weight, they're frustrated because it's like it's bad enough having Graves, but I can't even like lose
The
weight.
one
And they
quote
see,
unquote
yeah,
benefit of it, right?
exactly.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it follows logically in general when we talk again, hyper overproduction with Graves versus hypo like Hashimoto's underproduction, where you hear there's like weight loss resistance because the thermic regulator, your metabolism is dampened, and in Graves it sounds like it could be accelerated, but that's not necessarily a great thing because then higher heart rate, all those other things.
exactly.
So was that kind of the trigger for you to learn about this and then eventually expand your own scope of knowledge? Is that what led to why you do this today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, prior to this, I really had no experience with Graves at all.
Yeah.
I was my background's a chiropractor, and I was just practicing regular chiropractic and just just even though chiropractic goes beyond neck and back pain, but yeah, really. But I will say for my CE credits, I always used to attend and even currently attend nutritional and functional medicine seminars rather than like chiropractic technique seminars. So when I attended some of the the seminars for my CE credits, I learned about like there were a few functional endocrinology seminars that focused on thyroid health, and they of course focused more on hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, and also spoke about adrenals, not just thyroid, but they did talk a little bit about Graves and hyperthyroidism, and just by attending those seminars, I look back. So wasn't. It was 2008 when I was diagnosed, and it was probably just a couple of years prior to that when I attended at least the last of those seminars, and I realized that there was hope. There was a way to address it naturally, to manage the symptoms naturally, and to again to address the root cause. But I didn't have any experience of that, so I was at the same time kind of skeptical, and just was like, I have nothing to lose. I mean, I don't want to just take antithyroid medication for a prolonged period of time. And then the other two options are radioactive iodine, which is ablating the thyroid cells, or thyroid surgery. So I decided to change my diet, my lifestyle, and not as extreme as I did prior. But
Hmm.
yeah, and then took certain supplements, did some testing, and yeah, long story short, was able to restore my health. And yeah, and that was the driver, that was the motivator. I was like, there's so many people out there with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions, and unfortunately, most of them. I mean, this isn't a bad thing, but I was gonna say most of them focus on hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, but unfortunately, there's not a lot that focus on hyperthyroidism and Graves.
Got it. So you mentioned a few things I want to touch on because I think people need to first know if they even have a concern, right? And I assume it starts with symptoms and or different types of labs and blood work that we want to get into, like beyond just the typical labs into antibodies and things like that. But let's just start with the fact that, for example, everyone listening, when you go in a fat loss phase, if you're in a calorie deficit, we know things like that, stress on your body, will cause changes in your hormones, including thyroid. We know it drops. I don't know if you know exact numbers. I've seen stuff like 6% with a 500 calorie deficit is kind of an average ballpark for an average person with metabolic adaptation. And so, first of all, how do we distinguish whether somebody is just having symptoms from their lifestyle versus an actual condition? And for those listening, like, do they need to do some prep work first? Like, can a poor lifestyle show itself as a condition, or can you diagnose a condition independent of the lifestyle? Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, really, the official diagnosis is probably with tests. I mean, you could tell, like, if
Yeah.
I think back for, with my symptoms, I could have put the piece, like now looking back, it's like, okay, I was,
The symptom list. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the more extreme weight loss, the increased appetite. Again, that's not always related to, of course, hyperthyroidism, but then obviously with the increased resting heart rate, and then combine like the palpitations, I honestly didn't notice until after the blood test, until I
Yeah.
saw realized I had hyperthyroidism. But yeah, I mean, and with hypothyroidism, I mean, a lot of people, there's other, could be other causes for fatigue, like fatigue, weight gain are two of the more common symptoms. Obviously, there are other ones like coldness. If someone has coldness along with those symptoms, then they could maybe start putting the pieces together. But if they're just having the fatigue, the brain fog, the weight gain. It could be other things. They might say, well, it's just perimenopause, if they're in perimenopause, or I mean, it could be adrenals, or of course, a lot of people just blame it on poor eating, not enough sleep, which also, could cause many of those symptoms. So sometimes it is hard to, I guess, as far as diagnosing without testing. At least in my opinion, I guess most people that come and see me or remotely work with me, they've already been diagnosed. But if someone has come to me and they haven't yet had blood tests, I mean, yeah, you could get in some cases a good idea if someone has hyper or hypo, but again, there could be overlap with other conditions. So usually, you do want to do some testing, at the very least, a basic thyroid panel, but usually I like to go beyond that.
Okay, yeah, and I guess that's you're hitting on two populations, right? People that have already been diagnosed and people that haven't. And I guess people listening, let's start with the people that haven't, but they're having some issues. Maybe it's an inability to lose fat, and they're doing all the things. That's one of the ones I see a lot, right? Is just
Yep.
they try to go into calorie deficit, and their adaptation is really fast. Where even if they're tracking their calories and everything, it's like they have to keep dropping calories really fast, and something's off. And sometimes it's like you said, it's other hormones or it's perimenopause and other things happening at the same time. So I guess the question is, should like everybody listening get a basic thyroid panel soon if they've never had it? That's the first question. Like just in general, should people be getting that? Because there's certain things I feel like testosterone for men. I feel like not enough men are getting it checked early,
Yep.
just because the medical establishment doesn't require that at the moment, right? So that's my first question. Should everybody get their thyroid checked at a high level? And then when should they be more concerned to do the testing that I want you to explain beyond that?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, yeah, absolutely. I think just like most medical doctors, like if you go in for a physical, they're going to do a CBC, complete blood count. They'll do a comprehensive metabolic panel, maybe a lipid panel, and many times it just stops there. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, obviously there are other markers like vitamin D. I think everybody should get. You're right, like as far as like looking at testosterone and sex hormones. Yeah, so I think that everybody should get not just TSH, because again, some medical doctors will, as part of the physical, will look at TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, but at the very bare minimum, should look at TSH, T4, and T3. And some doctors, unfortunately, just look at TSH and T4, but again, T3 is that active form of thyroid hormone, and your TSH might be within the lab range. Again, there's maybe not within the optimal range, but the medical doctor's just looking at the lab range. And again, we could talk more about that,
Hmm.
but so they'll look at TSH, they'll look at T4. Both of them are within the lab range. They don't test T3, and again, they conclude everything's okay. Yet, if someone has a low T3, and again, even if they honestly, if they tested T3 might be on the lower side, but still, a lot of times it's within the range, so they still might blow it off and say, "Oh, that looks good too." But your T3 might be like a 2.3, whereas like optimal in the United States, like for free T3, would be between like, in my opinion, like 3.5. Some will say a little bit higher, but point is like 2.3 would be on the lower side, but within the lab range of most labs. So again, getting back to the original question, yeah, I think at the very least, TSH, free T3, free T4. I mean, should everybody get? I mean, there's like reverse T3, there's antibodies. Should everybody get the whole gamut of thyroid tests? I mean, of course, I'm going to be biased and say like it's, I mean, the antibodies, autoimmunity typically, I mean, it develops before it impacts the thyroid. There's like the silent autoimmune phase, especially with Hashimoto. So someone could have those auto antibodies for 5, 10, 15 years. So we can make the argument that if we're going to choose between a thyroid panel and antibodies, maybe we should test the antibodies first. But realistically, most medical doctors aren't going to do the whole thing just because you ask them. Many probably won't just do the whole thyroid panel because you ask them. They might do again a TSH, maybe a TSH T4. So most people listening will probably have to do it on their own, which again is fine. I pay for tests on my own. Like
Hmm.
again, I
Me
don't
too. Yeah.
expect
Yeah.
insurance to cover everything. But so yeah, I would say, especially if you're experiencing like what you mentioned, if like you're having issues losing weight, gaining muscle, have maybe having low energy. Uh, yeah, I mean, I would say not just don't just do TSH, free T3, free T4. I would say also look at reverse T3, look at the thyroid antibodies.
Look, if you're listening, we've talked about performance blood work in the past. Like if you can afford it and have access to it, get everything tested. Like in my opinion, but
Yeah.
you kind of answered that the antibodies are a precursor, is what you suggested, to the flare ups or the full condition occurring. So chicken and egg, would you just jump right to that? But try to at least get the main panel. I think you answered the question. You also alluded to ranges, and so how would people know? I know you mentioned numbers here on the podcast, but is it mainly in the functional medicine world that they're going to get access to, like, what a good range is and getting these tests, or will some traditional doctors work this as well?
Most of the time, you'll have to see a functional medicine practitioner. I mean, every now and then there'll be a doctor that looks and sees, well, your TSH is kind of on the higher side,
Yeah.
but still within range. But most of the time, they're just looking to see what's out of the range. And then if your TSH is like 3.5, which is within most lab ranges, but most functional medicine practitioners agree that's outside of the optimal range. So yeah, it's usually functional medicine that'll like tell you what the optimal ranges are or look at those optimal ranges.
Okay, and then for the antibodies, I'm definitely familiar with the some of the like the rheumatoid arthritis and sclerosis and kind of those conditions where you do the ANA titer, and then if that's positive, then you go to the next level. And I personally have a weird undiagnosed mixed connective tissue disease that's like antibody only with no symptoms. So, and I've had it for years and years. So, is that the process, or what are people looking to test for thyroid specifically?
Yeah, no, typically you don't. I mean, some people with Hashimoto's Graves might have a positive ANA, but it's not like some other, autoimmune conditions like lupus. Typically, you want to do an ANA first. Sjogren's. I mean, and yeah, some others with Graves, Hashimoto's usually, and this is just my approach. This seems to be the approach of most endocrinologists as well, where they're just going to jump into the antibody testing. If they do it at all, against unfortunately, some of them just they're not doing anything for the immune system. So some of them will just look at the thyroid numbers and that's it. They won't do any. Again, you like to think most of them will at least want to get a diagnosis that okay, the person has Hashimoto's, the person has Graves. So yeah, usually my approach, if the endocrine, let's say if someone didn't get the testing that they needed, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that everybody needs an ANA, but yeah, I definitely would recommend to look at the antibodies. And when it comes to thyroid autoimmunity, there's three types of thyroid antibodies. The most common thyroid antibody, which you probably heard of, TPO or thyroid peroxidase antibodies, which more commonly associated with Hashimoto's, but a lot of people with Graves also have those antibodies. Thyroid peroxidase is an enzyme that's important for the production of thyroid hormone. So it is more closely associated with damaging, like so it's more people are more likely to become hypo if they over time if they have those TPO antibodies. You have also thyroglobulin antibodies, and those are more specific to Hashimoto's. And then you have thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, which are a type of TSH receptor antibodies. So they bind to attack the TSH receptors of the thyroid, and that leads to the excess production of thyroid hormone. And those, of course, are the ones that are associated with Graves. And quickly, it's also worth mentioning that some people have all three antibodies. So it's not uncommon for people to have antibodies for both Hashimoto's and Graves.
Interesting. Okay, so thyroid peroxidase, TPO, thyroid globulin, and thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. That
You
what you
got it,
said?
or TSI.
Wow,
Yeah.
look at that. Good thing I'm writing my notes as we talk. No, I love this stuff. All right, great. So that kind of autoimmunity, then I think you talk sometimes about like there are triggers for this, right? It's not like how much of it is genetic and kind of unexplained versus we know there are triggers potentially where someone isn't there at this point. They can do something about it, say with their lifestyle, diet, or what have you.
Yeah. So I wrote one of the books I've written, Hashimoto's Triggers. Again, it's almost what is it like 500 and something pages. So again, there's a lot of different triggers, but to make it easier, I talk about four categories of triggers. So food, stress, environmental toxins, intoxicants, and infections. Some people say, well, how about nutrients? Well, nutrient deficiencies to me are more like underlying imbalances. I don't really like call them triggers. I guess you could call them triggers, but either way, like food such as gluten is probably the most common. You hear most functional medicine practitioners, especially those that work with a lot of autoimmune thyroid patients, and gluten. Not everybody has a sensitivity to gluten, but even if they don't, the studies have shown, at least one study, 2015, show that it can increase permeability in everybody, even if you don't have a sensitivity. I mean, obviously, if someone has celiac disease, yes, they definitely want to be strictly avoiding gluten, even like cross contamination. But while someone's healing, especially, I would say you want to avoid gluten. I mean, I recommend avoiding common allergens, gluten, taking a break from dairy, taking a break from corn, um, foods like that, or food categories. But stress. So I mentioned overtraining. So there could be either emotional or physical stress, and stress dysregulates the immune system, causes a pro-inflammatory state. It decreases secretory IgA, which lines the mucosal surfaces of the gastrointestinal tract, making someone more susceptible to infections, which is one of the other triggers that I mentioned. And also, I mean, this isn't a trigger, but and we can talk about this after. One way also, as far as weight gain, stress, affecting like cortisol, affecting conversion of T4 to T3. So if you have a lot of chronic stress, that could lead to lower T3 levels, which also could cause weight gain. So yeah, stress, and again, overtraining, over exercising, also could be a stressor. Environmental toxins, toxicants, huge in this day and age. Something we can't completely avoid, and they and some of them are autoimmune, potential autoimmune triggers. Heavy metals such as mercury. Now, xenoestrogens are fun, because they could also, again, this is just opinion, but in the literature, they also could affect autoimmunity, but they also are endocrine disrupting chemicals too. So for bisphenol A, BPA, microplastics can directly affect the thyroid gland, disrupt the thyroid gland. And yeah, so it could disrupt the thyroid gland, causing low thyroid, could cause autoimmunity, being a factor with Graves, Hashimoto's. There's mold, mycotoxins that fall within the category. Uh, then infections, different infections, viruses, bacteria such as H. pylori, Lyme disease. I mean, getting back to viruses during the pandemic, we definitely had a lot more people than usual with Graves. And I think Hashimoto's too, but again, we saw a lot more with Graves, but that's also because we focus more on seeing people with Graves disease. But I think even if you look at the research, like in PubMed, you'll see with COVID, greater likelihood to develop Graves compared to Hashimoto's. Epstein-Barr, there's that relationship for both Graves and Hashimoto's as potentially being a trigger. Yeah, so again, those are the four categories and some of the different things within those categories that could be triggers.
Yeah, and everything you just described sounds like it's associated with all the things that the fitness industry is either trying to get more into and understand or fearmonger about, depending on the side of the industry you're on, right? Because you could hear that list and say like, oh geez, I shouldn't even just go out in the world at all because I'm gonna get an issue. Things like environmental toxins, right, are interesting because I'm trying to learn more about that myself, Eric, because there has been a lot of misinformation in that world, and there's detox, and there's lots of buzzwords that aren't like scientifically defined the right way, in my opinion. But like you mentioned, heavy metals, and chocolate has a lot of natural cadmium in it, and people don't realize stuff like that. And you're like, geez, even kind of things that we don't consider quote unquote unhealthy. I mean, people, milk chocolate with a lot of sugar. Somebody might say maybe you should be eating that, but even just pure cocoa has cadmium from the ground or from the tree, right? From the cocoa bean. And then, our cookware and our beauty products, and like you just hear stories. It's like, where do you even begin with all that? And like you said, you can't avoid it all. So the question with something like that is, what's your 80/20 approach to dealing with that without just like throwing everything out of your house and living like a nomad in the woods, right? So just on environmental toxins, without making a whole separate episode, Eric, like if you had to pick the top three that most people are exposed to, that's a simple change in their life, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, definitely pure water, just
Okay.
and not out of plastic water bottles. So just I mean, we have reverse osmosis, and I mean, there's controversy because it removes the minerals, but you could always add back minerals, but it also removes pretty much all the toxins and toxicants. But you could also get a good quality spring water out of a glass bottle like Mountain Valley Springs. I mean, that's another option. But either way, you want to avoid tap water, you want to avoid water out of plastic bottles. So that would be number one, the biggest change they can make. And then I mean, I think you mentioned like cosmetics, like cleaners, cosmetics. I mean, those are also the second change and that people can make because most of our exposure is within our own home. I mean, obviously we get also exposures outside, but even so, there's only so much we could do once we walk out our home. But we, I guess, depends on the person how much time we spend in our own home. So, but again, the cosmetics cleaners that we use every day, there are natural alternatives. I mean, yeah, they're going to be a little bit pricey, but you could also make your own. And again, it's not like food. I mean, or obviously organic food, you could go through that really quickly. But if with your cosmetics, I mean, you're probably, and maybe not the best discussion with me and you because we're guys and we probably don't use as many cosmetics compared to like women.
I
But
was gonna say that, like, I just keep it simple. That's my that's my solution. Just don't
yes.
use many of them.
Yeah, but again, even my wife, I mean, it's not like she's ordering. I mean, she probably is ordering every week, but they're different ones, like whatever but again, like use natural shampoos, natural, again, use, body creams or whatever you use. I mean, there's again a natural option and I mean, just start with one or two to begin with if you have to. Again, if you're like, if you're using like 15, 20 different ones, I know you're probably not going to swap all of them at once. Maybe use one or two that you use the most. And you can visit Environmental Working Group, I think ewg.org, the Skin Deep website, like to see like if because again, just because it says natural doesn't mean you gotta
Mm.
also
Oh
become an
yeah,
expert in reading ingredients, but you could
yep.
use
Labels.
yeah, so exactly. So and then I mean, there's a few different things. I mean, I guess we could say pure air, like you get a pure air purifier or a couple of air purifiers in your home, depending on how big your home is. But even again, if you just start with one, like a HEPA air purifier, and put it in the room where, like, I guess if you have kids and all that, it's hard because again, was gonna say the bedroom is where you probably spend most of the time, like at least hopefully 7, 8 hours. But then again, if you have kids, you're probably gonna. But you could if you could only start out if you could only afford one, you could also rotate it, like put it in your like your
Hmm.
kid's room one night, put it in your room another night if you absolutely have to. I mean, the ideal situation would be to have multiple air filters. But yeah, I would say clean water, cosmetics, air, again, not necessarily in that order. We could say air maybe
Sure.
before the cosmetics. I mean, so yeah, and then a fourth one, and again, not necessarily in number four. We could bump this up too, but I mentioned the food, like maybe trying to eat more organic food, especially fruit, vegetables, and meat. And yeah, so I would say, so I'll say that those are my top four.
Yeah, no, it's great. Like you said, if it's 500 pages of triggers and each of these categories, you probably have like 20 episodes on each on your podcast. You know what I mean? It's just so detailed. So we're not going to solve all of that today. It's more of an awareness so that people understand that there are multifactorial reasons to care about what's going in your mouth, what you're doing, managing your stress. I like that you mentioned, both the emotional and physical stress, because I think stress also is a big catch-all. And I feel like, I don't know, 20 years from now, are we going to have much more nuance when we say stress? Because there's like the stress response itself is so complex and like fundamental to the human body that there's even perceived stress, Eric. Like the more I work with clients, just like you do, I'm sure the way people frame things and their psychology around stress and things in their life tend to affect the stress response inside their body, right?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, and I think I mean, that's even more important than the stressor itself, because you're right. I mean, you can have two people with identical stressors, and really does come down to the perception of the stressor. If someone is, just more laid back, and the old saying, "Don't sweat the small stuff." But even if, again, even sometimes like big stressors, I mean, some people just do a better job of handling the stress, and again, their perception of the stress. Everybody's perception of the stress is different. So yeah, that's an excellent point.
And where is that line of stress when it comes to what we call the good stressors, right? The hormetic stressors like training and exercise, where, your message of not overtraining is also one that I have a lot. And very often I'll see a client with adrenal issues, with stress issues, they're medicated. and they just have to strip out a lot of what they're doing and just simplify. And all of a sudden it unlocks a new era of low stress growth, better hormones, and even the building muscle. They go to the gym now 3 days a week instead of 7, and they start building more muscle because they're not so stressed and under recovered. So where's that line so that people can self-diagnose or figure out where that is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mentioned earlier, a lot of it comes down to listening to your body. Like because again, sometimes it is hard to know. Like, are you overdoing it? And again, this is also where your expertise comes in. So, and I think I asked you when you're on my podcast, like, how long should people train for? Like, if someone's at the gym for, or even at home working out, and for like 2 hours straight, that might be a little bit too much, in my opinion. Now, maybe for some people it's not, but I mean, I guess when I dealt with Graves, and I was, or actually before, prior to my Graves diagnosis, and I was over exercising after my workout, and I wasn't working out for 2 hours. I was maybe working out for an hour, which is what I do now. The difference is I was doing more cardio than and high intensity, not necessarily high intensity interval training, but just high intensity, like just going
Mhm.
all out, on the rowing machine and run, just on just and just yeah, I was wiped out. So that's not a good sign too. Like when you're done with your workout, in my opinion, you should feel like you could do more. That doesn't mean you necessarily should do more, but you feel like, I feel good. I feel like I got a great workout in. But if I had to go another 20, 30 minutes, I could do that. And also it's a good sign when you work out. Like again, I do most of the time. I do have some equipment at home, but most of the time I go to the gym, and when I'm done, I could just walk out. I don't have to like sit down and rest, and catch my breath for a few minutes before heading out. So, which again ties into the first one where you could do more. So there are obvious signs. I mean, sometimes it might not be that obvious, but I think those, I mean, and again, I love to get your feedback with this, but I think again, just really listening to your body. I'm not against cardio. I do cardio, but just again, not. I think that's more people overdo it with the cardio, but I'm sure you also see people doing it, overdoing it with maybe weight training too, and just again, maybe doing an hour and a half, 2 hours of weight training. And again, some people might be fine doing that. Other people not fine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it depends on the mode, and like an hour and a half for some of the big, powerlifting type guys is not a big deal because they're taking
Yeah.
so much rest. But yeah, I like your litmus test actually there for how do you feel at the end of your workout? Because I personally did CrossFit for like 8 years, and I would say 10% pro, 90% con out of that experience. Number one, because I probably got some long lasting injuries and nagging things going on because of high reps, constant muscular endurance, never taking a break, and then doing things with terrible form in the interest of speed, can all exacerbate your stress on your body as well. But if you're falling down and you have to like lay on your back for 10 minutes before you even move after a workout, that's probably a good sign it's over stressful. I think of that like if you're competing, or if you're powerlifting competition or whatever, that's where you're pushing a max and that's like an extreme, right? Or if you did a marathon, that's the extreme. That's the few and far between, not the every single training session. So listen to what Eric is saying, because that just is a very simple metric where next time you go to the gym, if you're just completely wiped, think about what that means and where you could potentially dial back. So I agree. Other than that, it's like, are you able to go into the gym the next session feeling pretty fresh? And are you not feeling overly sore? Because you shouldn't be chasing soreness either. That's a different thing.
Yep.
Anyway, you're my guest on the podcast. I don't want to do all the talking here, but yeah, no, that's good stuff. So what else about thyroid? There's a lot about thyroid we could talk about. I think you hit on earlier the treatment for thyroid. I think is important to touch on because you talk about, natural approaches, which we love here. But I know there's radioactive iodine, there's surgery, there's things that just destroy or remove the thyroid, right? What's the spectrum look like in terms of treatment options? Which ones are you more, in favor of if people can do it versus cautious of?
Yeah. So, and of course, it varies depending on whether someone has
Yeah.
hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, or hyperthyroidism, Graves. So, like with Hashimoto's, it's or low thyroid. Typically, it's thyroid hormone replacements is what most conventional medical doctors recommend, and also a lot of functional medicine doctors. There definitely is a time and place for thyroid hormone replacements. But just as I mentioned earlier, it depends on what's going on with the thyroid, and sometimes they just look at the TSH and they make that determination. TSH is elevated, so let's just give you some levothyroxine, which is synthetic T4. And again, they might not look at. Maybe they will also look at the T4, but they won't look at the T3. And if the T4 is looking good, T3 is low, giving more T4 isn't necessarily the answer. Now, you could say then there's also synthetic T3, like Cytomel, that you could give, or you could give desiccated thyroid,
Mm,
such as
mm,
Armor, NP thyroid, are two of the more common prescriptions options out there. There's also like thyroid glandulars too that have some T4, T3 that you could kind of get on your own without a doctor's prescription. But either way, I mean, there's a time and place for that. But you, of course, want to try to address the underlying cause of the problem, even if you do need thyroid hormone replacements. I mean, if it's Hashimoto's, you want to address the autoimmune component. Some people will still need to remain on thyroid hormone, even when addressing the immune system. But some people actually could get off of it or might need a decreased dose. But
mhm.
again, most medical doctors just say be on the thyroid hormone. They're not doing anything for the immune system in the case of Hashimoto's. And then again, when it's like non autoimmune and you have that conversion problem, T4 to T3, conversion, it's like, well, why do you have the conversion problem? Why do you, rather than just, yeah, again, even if they give T4 and T3 a desiccated, that's covering both bases. And again, maybe the person doesn't need T4 if it looks good, but still they'll typically give it. The TSH is high. They usually won't just give T3 alone. But yeah, anyway, so that's typically what we're looking at with hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's as far as treatment. Uh, with with hyperthyroidism Graves, I mentioned the three options: antithyroid medication, radioactive iodine, thyroid surgery. But what I didn't mention is when I dealt with Graves, I actually took an herbal approach to symptom management while
Mm,
addressing the cause of the problem. So I used an herb called bugleweed, which I don't know if you ever heard of. It's not one of the more popular herbs out there, but so bugleweed is an herb that has anti-thyroid properties, and I took that and I noticed it helping probably within the first week. I mean, symptom wise. So that's where you're asking like symptoms versus
yeah.
testing, and I didn't know for sure, if it like I didn't know like what my thyroid of course looked like, but when I took it, I was measuring my resting heart rate and I noticed my heart rate was decreasing while taking a bugleweed. I was still having some palpitations, so I also added another herb called motherwort, which is kind of like a natural beta blocker. Not exactly. I mean, it helps support the cardiovascular system. Has other functions as well, um, but yeah. So I took bugleweed as well as motherwort. And then those are what I took. But you're probably well familiar with L-carnitine. So I wanted to
Mhm.
bring up L-carnitine too, because there are some studies related to hyperthyroidism. Usually it's not, like when you hear about L-carnitine, it's like to support like fatty acid oxidation and other benefits. But yeah, there are there are actually a few studies. There's one, actually a few older studies, and not like really old, but showing that higher amounts of L-carnitine, like 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams, could block the entry of thyroid hormone into the cell. So it could actually act as like kind of anti-thyroid. And then a more recent study from August 2025 showed that taking just only 500 milligrams of L-carnitine when combined with selenium, and this was specific to Graves patients, show that these people needed less medication, less methimazole in their cases, and then also helped with the thyroid antibodies. So L-carnitine, another option. Lemon balm is something else. Another is an herb that commonly recommended for those with hyperthyroidism, has kind of
Mm,
like a calming effect. So there are definitely natural options. And then one other thing I'll throw out there, which you might have had other guests speak about, maybe LDN, low dose naltrexone. I don't know if, so which for both Graves and Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions, it can modulate the immune system. And I mean, it's not doing anything for the cause of the problem, but neither
mm,
is anything else that I just mentioned.
yeah.
I mean, we're just talking about more natural options. They're not doing anything for the cause, but so LDN, the good news, it's helping to modulate the immune system. The bad news is if like someone's taking LDN and they're also trying to do things to improve their immune system health, like lower antibodies naturally, it might be hard to know if they're taking
Yeah.
LDN because LDN could lower
Mask the
antibodies.
yeah, I see.
But
Yeah.
but as soon as they're off the LDN, they usually the antibodies will eventually increase.
All right. So along those lines, I was actually thinking, you talked about triggers and food and diet and exercise and training. Is being too lean a problem for someone with thyroid issues, or can it cause it? And I mean, like being excessively lean, like bodybuilding stage lean.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, the answer. I mean, if you're too lean, that definitely could be a problem from a thyroid standpoint. Um, Also, an adrenal standpoint too. We really haven't spoken much. I did mention a little bit of cortisol, but yeah, we this day and age, of course, there's a lot more talk about like obesity and problems
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
obesity, which obviously that's an issue. But yeah, when I'll say though, in my practice, when I see a lot of that, but it's mostly not people being too lean from like working out or dieting. But again, in my case, I see it like in my situation, like hyperthyroidism. There's a lot of work with a lot of women where they're, and that's not good either. That's
Oh, like
um
uncontrolled weight loss, right? Is
yeah,
what you're
so it's
saying.
a little
Yeah.
bit different, but you're talking about actually like if
No,
someone
somebody who's
is,
deliberately being
yeah,
lean, and in some cases there's a situation where they're afraid to gain weight or don't want to gain weight. They want to stay lean, but then they have a thyroid issue. And my first thought is gain some weight and let's see how that helps.
yeah,
you know?
like intermittent fasting, I mean, that also, like, I
Yeah.
don't have anything against intermittent fasting, but if someone's doing like a, like 20, like a 4-hour eating window, every day, it's just 20 hours
It's
of
stressful,
fasting,
right?
then
Yeah.
that, could
Yeah.
be responsible for like the thyroid getting lower and not, just, so yeah, that could, that, I don't know if you'd say trigger, I guess you could say trigger, like underlying, so not like a trigger, like autoimmune trigger, but as far as a factor causing like the low thyroid. So yeah, certainly if someone is, like really restricting calories, that could be a big factor. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes we see that with again, not that I have a lot of people that following ketogenic diet, but ketogenic diet can have that impact on thyroid.
Yeah, no, I ask because it is an avatar that's out there, and it's like we know that thyroid is downregulated through a calorie deficit itself, but that's kind of
Yeah,
a normal response. It's once you've leaned out and then you try to stay lean. I know there are negatives, and we know that from the physique world, but I think some people are in denial that they should just gain weight and maybe that will help, kind of recover. And there's sometimes reasons for that, body dysmorphia and other stuff that we
yeah.
have to deal with. But the fasting thing's an interesting one because I'm seeing more online now about a recent big meta analysis that came out. And it first came to my attention from Alan Aragon because he posted about it that showed, inflammatory markers measured by blood, can go up with prolonged fasting, which is not a huge surprise. Many of us know that it's a stressful thing, but there's such a narrative about fasting being this wonderful thing for reasons that are not supported that it's important to mention the downsides. So,
Yeah.
last thing, Eric, is I was thinking you're an expert in the space. You've been in it for a long time now, like 15 years plus, I want to say, right? Since your condition, basically.
Mhm.
You've written books, you host the podcast. Is there something you've heard a lot? Okay, so you've heard a lot. Is there something about thyroid health that either people are not talking about or not acknowledging enough, or you wish more people knew, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, most of what we spoke about here, I
Yeah.
mean, the triggers
Oh,
are,
that's
not-
true.
I mean, it's yeah, I mean, if I had to like pick one, because there are a lot of things. Again, I'll go back to, the toxins and toxicants. I mean, you do hear more like in the functional medicine space, of course, about the plastics and the microplastics, but the glyphosate, things like, but unfortunately you just still see people like, people still don't pay attention. I mean, even at the, like you go to the gym, for example. Again, I don't know if you work out at home or at the gym. You work out at home, right? I think you
At
have your
home,
own gym.
but
Yeah,
I've been to gyms.
but if you go to the gym again, you'll see a lot of people still carrying their like plastic water bottles that might be, either sometimes just regular plastic water bottles that have the BPA. Sometimes it's the BPA free water bottles that also have like the BPS. Like they have other structural analogs that act like BPA, so they're still endocrine disrupting chemicals. And then, not the gym I go to doesn't have this, but some, like, when cleaning the machines, they have like the sprays, like, so people are spraying all over, like, so I guess the big thing, and again, this probably is going beyond the thyroid, but I guess the point is like a lot of these things are endocrine disruptors, thyroid
Mhm.
disruptors, also other hormones too, not just the thyroid, but since we're focusing on the thyroid, but But again, like I said, they have dual effects. They're not only disrupting the thyroid. Well, actually, I should say more than two effects, because some of these, like microplastics, bisphenol A. So I mentioned endocrine disrupting chemicals affecting thyroid directly and other hormones. I mentioned also being potential trigger for autoimmunity, but they also could increase permeability of the gut, as well. Um,
Which is linked to the thyroid and many other things. Yeah.
Disrupt the gut microbiome, which affects the thyroid, but affects like again, if you have another thing too, if you have one autoimmune condition, more likely to develop other autoimmune conditions in the future. So I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I guess the chemicals is still something that you don't hear enough about. You don't see, you see people do. I mean, people I think are definitely eating cleaner. A lot of people are eating cleaner, and you do see, I guess, people at least trying to attempt to drink cleaner water. But again, too many people are buying water by the case. Still like plastic water bottles by the case, and still spraying their lawn with using things that have glyphosate in there. And again, the cosmetics too. I mean, a lot of people are switching to natural cosmetics, but still, I mean, most of the people I know, like when I just meet people randomly, like outside of the functional medicine space, they're usually not doing that. And, they're fascinated when I have conversations about these things. And it's like, yeah, just, so not enough. So I would say that's one thing that I talk about all the time. One of the things I talk about all the time that still most people aren't doing.
Yeah, what comes to mind, this is just anecdotal because you said it's not talked about outside functional medicine. First of all, the incentives we have in place and the environment we have in place is always a huge force, right? Including our food environment. We know that there's so much pressure and economic incentive. And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial way. I just mean like you're going to buy the tub of water because it's cheaper and it's more readily available. So that's an economic incentive. People are tired and not wanting to think about this stuff too, as much as, I think another thing is they don't see the results. This is one of those things that's mysterious and I'll say has like, I guess, longer term impacts on your health that are harder to measure. Whereas like you go to the gym for a few weeks and you look better in the mirror, that's going to be a self-reinforcing pattern. So if we can connect some of these behaviors to the blood work, the thyroid, the things that are measurable, perhaps that'll be a way to do it.
Yep.
I did an episode not long ago about cookware in the kitchen, like talking about the PFAS in your non-toxic pans, because my wife hasn't wanted to use non-toxic pans for a long time. And I used to be the guy that was like, it's, and then the more I looked into it, the more of, holy crap, this stuff is. So I just made eggs today in my, Chef's Foundry was one of our sponsors. So I got some pans from them and they're like the ceramic, non-stick, without the stuff. But yeah, so glass water bottles, glass, if you're going to microwave using glass, like I think that's a good idea. All that stuff is important. It's just a matter of awareness and the pocketbook and how important it is to you and how important you think it's actually moving the needle, right? All what we're trying to do, right, Eric?
Yeah, exactly. I do agree.
So anyway, where can people find you? Because it's been a cool conversation. I'll definitely send them to your podcast. And where else do you want them to look you up?
Yeah. So yeah, the podcast. There's I mean my books. I think you mentioned them in the beginning. I have 3 books on Amazon. 2 of them related to hyperthyroidism. One of them related to Hashimoto's. We were chatting a little bit before interviewing. I have a community on the platform School Healing Graves Naturally, which savemythyroid.com/heal Graves disease. So that's growing pretty quickly, and there's a lot of engagement in there. And I also have a newsletter, Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid. With savemythyroid.com/newsletter. So yeah, those are some of the places you could check me out.
So it sounds like if we include the link to the podcast and your website, the website can get them to the books and the community and everything else. It's all connected there.
That should be true, but it's not. At the books, yeah, actually the books,
Okay.
like the books, my YouTube channel, it does, but actually I need to actually include links to the newsletter and the community. But if they actually visited the newsletter, there are a lot of other resources, but I actually probably, those are new things this year. So my website's been around for a few years.
All right. So thank you so much, Eric. Guys, check out the Save My Thyroid podcast. You'll also hear our discussion on there. You'll have to hunt around depending on when all these episodes come out. Go to savemythyroid.com. We'll throw all these links in the show notes. Eric is the man if you want to learn about thyroid, natural approaches, triggers, what to test, what to do. A lot of our stuff is very much aligned. So if you have a question, reach out to him or me about this topic and we'll help you out. Eric, thank you so much for coming on Wits and Weights.
Thank you so much, Philip.